Netherham was the sort of village where the weather carried whispers, and every chimney knew your name. A sleepy corner of the English countryside, it hadn't seen scandal since the vicar's daughter married the butcher's son in secret. Miss Jane Marple had just settled in for her evening tea when it happened. Ring. She blinked. That was odd. Her telephone sat quietly in the corner. No lights. No ringer. The sound hadn't come from her house. But she'd heard it, shrill, antique, and twice. A pause. Then silence. She stood up and peered through the lace curtains. Nothing. Only fog curling around the trees like a cat stretching along the hedgerows. Then came the whispering. Faint. Deliberate. Not voices, but something less definite. Like silence trying to speak. She knew that sound. The silence of something waiting to be found. By noon the next day, the news spread like spilled ink. The old Ashcroft House telephone had rung. Twice. Ashcroft House had stood abandoned since Colonel Harrington died 2 years earlier. A man of strict morals, wore medals, and whispered regrets. His widow had passed the next spring. No heirs, no sales. The place had been locked, disconnected, and forgotten. Miss Marple wasn't the sort to chase shadows. But when shadows chased her, well, that was different. She took her knitting, her cane, and a sturdy pair of walking shoes and made her way across the village green. Ashcroft's iron gate was ajar. She stepped through. The air was cool. The leaves had a crispness to them. The door opened with a dry groan, and Miss Marple stepped into dust and memory. The hall still held traces of the colonel, his boots beneath the stand, a silver cane by the door, and yes, the telephone. Old, black, rotary dial. Miss Marple walked toward it slowly, fingers tingling. There was no cord plugged into the wall. And yet, it rang again. Once. Then once more. And then, silence. Dash dash dash. Inspector Cray arrived within the hour. He wasn't quick to dismiss Miss Marple's observations, not since that business with the apothecary and the missing widow in Little Wychfield. I heard it too, she said. Cray examined the telephone. This line's been dead for 2 years. I counted the rings. Always twice. Never more. Odd, he muttered. Could be a prank, or a message. Miss Marple glanced toward the stairs. Colonel Harrington left puzzles behind, Inspector. Maybe this is one more. They searched the rooms. Nothing. Until the attic. There, under an old trunk filled with moth-eaten uniforms, Cray's constable found a box of letters tied with red string. Addresses. None. Only a name. The colonel's own. Each letter was dated months before the colonel's death. The top letter read, greater than, for the day she finds the silence. If you're reading this, you've heard it too. 2 rings for the lies we buried. The 3rd ring, we'll dig them up. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. She turned the page. Another message. Greater than, she screamed. But only once. The 2nd silence was mine. I kept it locked in the east wing. The key sleeps where I once walked in truth. East wing? Cray asked. Miss Marple stood. This house doesn't have an east wing, anymore. Cray blinked. Anymore. She nodded. It burned. The year before the war. The east wing of Ashcroft House had once contained guest rooms, a conservatory, and the colonel's study. But in 1936, a fire had consumed that part of the manor. Officially, it was blamed on faulty wiring. Unofficially, there had been whispers, of a woman seen running from the house, of a scream, and of the colonel weeping by the ashes. Miss Marple, ever the student of human nature, remembered the incident well. Does it not strike you as odd, she said to Inspector Cray, that the colonel's letters reference something, someone, he kept hidden there? You're suggesting he locked someone away? No, she replied softly, eyes fixed on the dusty floorboards. I'm suggesting someone was silenced, and the house tried to forget. That evening, as Cray and his men cleared away the attic boxes, Miss Marple returned home. She made herself a simple supper, boiled egg, toast, tea, and sat near her window. Ring. She froze. Ring. She turned. The mirror on her wall, an old antique with floral engraving, was reflecting her telephone. Which hadn't rung. And then, ring. A 3rd time. From nowhere. From everywhere. And then, nothing. She stood, heart still calm, but her fingers tightening on her cane. So it's begun, she whispered. The 3rd ring. The next morning, she sought out the only person still alive who had once worked at Ashcroft House, Edith Lane, the housekeeper from 1922 to 1936. Edith lived in a small stone cottage near the mill, surrounded by rosebushes and cats. Her mind was sharp, but her hands trembled. I swore I'd never speak of it, Edith muttered when Miss Marple asked about the fire. But if the colonel's calling, then it's time. Who was she? Edith. Alice. Alice, his sister. Much younger. Touched in the head, some said. Others said she'd seen something awful, during the war. She lived in the East Wing. She was kept there, against her will. Edith nodded, eyes filled with regret. She tried to escape, twice. The third time, her voice caught. The fire. She died. No body was found. The colonel told us she was taken to a hospital. But I never saw a doctor. Never heard a carriage. Just silence. Miss Marple returned to Ashcroft House. She went to the colonel's study, what remained of it after the wing was destroyed. Beneath a flagstone near the hearth, she found it. A brass key, cold, smooth, and slightly scorched. She handed it to Cray that evening. The door still stands, behind the brick wall. Together, they removed the wooden paneling. Behind it, a charred but intact door. Cray unlocked it. The hinges shrieked. Inside, a narrow corridor led to a blackened chamber. And there, sitting in an old wooden chair, untouched by time, was a skeleton. A mirror stood across from it, cracked but intact, and carved into the wood frame. She will speak when silence calls 3 times. Here's part 3 of your detective mystery story. Miss Marple and the silence that called twice. The skeleton sat upright, as if patiently waiting. Clutched in one bony hand was a silver locket. Inside it, a faded photograph of a young woman, dark-haired, bright-eyed, wearing a brooch in the shape of a lily. Miss Marple looked closer. That's not Alice Harrington, she whispered. That's Margaret Fenley. Who's Margaret Fenley? Cray asked. She vanished in 1936, Miss Marple said. The same night as the fire. Cray frowned. But the housekeeper said the woman kept in the East Wing was the colonel's sister. Perhaps that's what she believed, Miss Marple said softly. But people hide truths behind simpler lies. Margaret Fenley was a name once whispered in the hallways of Netherham's social circles. She was a painter, quiet and reclusive, who had moved to the village in 1934. She was said to be working on a portrait of Colonel Harrington. And then, she disappeared. Now her remains sat silently in the house of the man who had once commissioned her. Miss Marple examined the room. In a corner, under a dusty cloth, she found an easel. The painting was unfinished, just a background, a vague figure in shadow. But the style was unmistakable. And beside it, scratched into the wall, he said my silence would save us both. Among the letters from the attic, Miss Marple found one that now stood out. It was dated 3 days before the fire and read, greater than, I cannot let her speak. She knows too much. And I was weak. She came to paint, and I gave her everything, access, stories, my trust. But she found the files. The orders. The truth. If she tells, then we both fall. I've locked the door. I've taken the key. The silence is safer than scandal. J.H. Cray set the paper down. So he killed her to protect a secret. Miss Marple shook her head. No, he locked her away. But the fire may not have been his doing. Or hers. Cray blinked. Then who? The very next day, a young woman arrived in Netherham. Tall, dark-haired, sharp-eyed. She introduced herself as Anna Fenley, granddaughter of Margaret Fenley. I've always believed my grandmother didn't just disappear, she said. She left me her journals, and clues led me here. Miss Marple welcomed her, cautious but intrigued. Did you come alone? She asked. Anna smiled. I did, but I've never felt alone. My grandmother's story always called to me. That night, the telephone in Ashcroft House rang again. 3 times. Miss Marple stood in the doorway and whispered, she knows. Ashcroft House was silent, too silent. Cray and Miss Marple stood in the parlor, with Anna Fenley seated near the fireplace. Outside, the fog thickened as if the past itself resisted being uncovered. The mirror, Anna said, staring into its cracked glass. It was the last thing she painted. Her journals said she believed reflections trapped more than light. Miss Marple nodded. She was kept in a room with only a mirror, no windows, no clocks. That would fracture any mind. Cray said, but why keep the mirror? Miss Marple moved closer to it. Because it was Margaret's way out. If the colonel wouldn't let her speak, she'd make the silence speak for her. As if on cue, the telephone rang. Once, twice, thrice, and this time, the mirror shuddered. A crack spread, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Inside, Margaret's final journal. She had discovered that Colonel Harrington had been involved in a covert post-war operation, selling stolen documents from German archives. She had stumbled upon the files while painting his portrait. She confronted him. He begged her to stay silent. She refused. He imprisoned her in the East Wing, convincing staff she was a troubled sister. When she tried to escape, he threatened to end her life. She began scratching messages into the walls, painting silent screams into the shadows. The mirror had been her only friend, and her secret weapon. In her last entry, she wrote, "Greater than, the silence he gave me will echo louder than his voice. And when the phone rings, the truth will answer." Inspector Cray opened an official inquiry. Though Colonel Harrington was long dead, the truth couldn't remain buried. The ministry confirmed the wartime scandal. Records were unsealed. Margaret's name was cleared. Anna Fenley received her grandmother's remains with grace, and chose to bury her under the old oak tree behind Ashcroft House, where birds still sang in the morning. The mirror was placed in the village museum, cracked but whole. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Greater than, in memory of Margaret Fenley." The silence she endured became the voice of truth. A week later, Miss Marple sat by her fire with her usual tea and slice of seed cake. The fog had lifted from Netherham, and peace returned like a soft quilt laid over the village. Cray dropped by, as he often did after difficult cases. "Another mystery solved," he said, sipping from a chipped cup. Miss Marple smiled. "I find it's rarely the noise that hides the truth, it's the silences. Especially those that call more than once." He raised an eyebrow. "You're quite fond of mirrors and mysteries." She nodded, eyes twinkling. "Because both show what others try not to see." The clock struck 5. Somewhere in the house, the phone gave one faint ring. Then, no more, just silence.